It was close to midnight when the call came through. A young man was on the line and he could barely get the words out. His parents were on the floor. There was blood everywhere. He thought they had been shot. The caller was 20-year-old Sef Gonzales. To almost everyone who knew him, he was Sef. And the people inside the house were his father Teddy, his mother Mary, and his younger sister Clodine. His entire family was inside that house. And Sef was saying that every one of them had been murdered. But Sef hadn't just walked into that house and found something unimaginable. He already knew his parents had not been shot. He knew where Clodine was. He knew why no one had answered the telephone. And he knew what had happened in every room. Because hours before he made that call, Sef Gonzales had come home with a plan. By the time he left, there was no one alive. This is the story of Teddy, Mary, and Clodine Gonzales, and the son who waited inside their home for each of them to return. Hey, it's Linda, and this is Coffee and Crime. This podcast explores real cases involving violence, loss, and the darker side of human nature. Some details may be confronting. Listener discretion is strongly advised. "11 years before Collins Street, the Gonzales family had already watched one life collapse around them. On 16th of July 1990, a powerful earthquake struck the Philippine island of Luzon. Baguio City was among the places hit hardest. Buildings came down, roads split open, families surged through concrete and dust for the people they loved. Teddy Gonzales had recently built a hotel in the city. It was the family business, their security, and the future he had been working towards. Within minutes, it was gone. Teddy, his wife Mary, and their children had been inside. Most of them escaped, but 10-year-old Sef became trapped in a stairway. His leg caught beneath the debris. Teddy had made it out. Then he realised his son had not. So Teddy went back. Teddy squeezed through a crack in the wall to reach his son. He pulled Sef from the ruins. And in doing so, Teddy tore a ligament that left him with chronic pain. He had gone back into a collapsing building for his son. 11 years later, that same son would wait for him beside the front door of their home. The hotel wasn't the only thing the earthquake took. The life Teddy and Mary had been building around it had gone as well. Mary encouraged Teddy to leave the tragedy behind and begin again. In 1991, the Gonzales family migrated to Sydney. Starting again in Australia meant exactly that. Starting again. Teddy had already qualified as a lawyer in the Philippines, but in Sydney he had to establish himself all over again. Eventually, he became a solicitor specialising in immigration law. He had rebuilt his own life in a new country. Now he was helping other people do the same. Mary worked beside him as the office manager of the legal practice in Blacktown. Mary was devoted, hardworking and loving, the person who held the family together. Teddy and Mary ran the practice together, and slowly they rebuilt the security they had lost. By 2001, the family lived in a 2-story home at 6 Collins Street in North Ryde. A modern home, a quiet suburb, a business of their own. From the outside, it looked as though the family had finally made it through. But surviving something like that can change what safety means to a family. Teddy and Mary knew how quickly money, property and plans could disappear. So when they pushed their children towards education and secure careers, it wasn't coming from nowhere. For Teddy and Mary, education wasn't simply a collection of marks. It was protection, something that an earthquake could not reduce to rubble, something their children could carry wherever life took them. That's why it mattered to them so much. The family was also deeply Catholic. The church was part of the life they had carried with them from the Philippines. It was simply part of their week. They were a family, complicated, imperfect, sometimes strict, sometimes tense. They made decisions their children hated. And like plenty of young people, their children kept things from them. Nothing about those disagreements made the family disposable. Nothing made violence inevitable. Their youngest child was Clodine. She was born on the 9th of July, 1983. By 2001, she was a high school student who usually lived with one of Mary's sisters in Melbourne. Her parents had disapproved of a relationship that she had formed with a boy in Sydney, so they sent her to Melbourne to place some distance between them. But during the July school holidays, Clodine returned to the family home in North Ryde. She was due to go back to Melbourne soon after. On Monday, the 9th of July 2001, Clodine turned 18. She was old enough to begin making her own decisions. Old enough to start imagining the life she might have once school was over. Her brother Sef was 20. He was approaching his 21st birthday and studying legal subjects with a Bachelor of Arts course at Macquarie University. He also helped at his father's office. His parents believed they were watching their son move toward a legal career. But beneath the appearance of university life, Sef was failing. His results were poor. Instead of telling them, he changed the story on paper. Marks that looked better than the ones that he had earned. For a while, the false results bought him time, but they couldn't give him the degree. Sooner or later, Teddy and Mary were always going to find out that the life Sef had been showing them wasn't real. Once Teddy and Mary discovered that Sef had falsified his results, they warned him that if he did not improve during the next semester, they would take back his car and withdraw other privileges. The car mattered to him. It was a green Ford Fiesta his parents had given him. For most 20-year-olds, that would mean an argument, a punishment, and probably a great deal of resentment. For Seth, it became part of a reason to kill. And then there was the money. Teddy and Mary owned property in Australia and the Philippines. Under their wills, their children stood to inherit. If both parents died, Sef would share the estate with Clodine. If Clodine died as well, he would be the only surviving child. If all three of them were gone, there would be no sister beside him and no parents above him. There would be one surviving child, one person expecting the estate. But before he reached for knives, Sef tried something quieter. Months before July 10th, he researched poisons on the internet. He looked into toxic plants. He ordered poisonous seeds. And around 10 days before the murders, he gave poison to Mary with the intention of killing her. She became ill, but she survived. Mary became sick without knowing that her son had caused it. The poisoning failed. The intention didn't disappear with it. Sef changed the method. And this is what makes the poison so important. It shows that the murders did not begin with one terrible argument on the 10th of July. Sef had already decided that he could live in a world without his mother in it. Mary survived. She went back to work. She continued managing the office. She continued being a mother. And Sef continued planning. Mary seems to have no idea she was in danger. And honestly, why would she? A parent might suspect their child is lying about university. They don't expect that child to be researching poison. That trust gave Sef access. He could move through the house without frightening anyone. It allowed him to take knives from the family kitchen. And it meant Clodine had no reason to be afraid when her brother came home. Tuesday, 10th of July, 2001. The morning after Clodine's 18th birthday. Nothing about the date announced what it would become. It began as a Tuesday in winter. A working day for Teddy and Mary. A university day for Seth. A school holiday morning for Clodine. No smashed glass. No forced door. No stranger watching from the street. The danger already had a key. Teddy and Mary prepared for work. They travelled separately to the family's legal practice in Blacktown. Clodine remained at Collins Street. Sef went to Macquarie University that morning. Later, he returned to the family home. Then he drove to Teddy's office in the green Ford Fiesta. He arrived around 1 o'clock. For the next few hours, father and son worked in the same office. Sef tried to fix a computer and made calls for the practice. Mary is managing the practice beside him. That is the last stretch of the day in which the family still exists as 4 people. Once Sef leaves Blacktown, everything closes in. 1 house, 1 car in an open carport, and 3 people who will come within reach of him, one after another. Sometime between 3 and 4 in the afternoon, Sef left the Blacktown office. The drive to North Ryde took around 30 to 40 minutes. He parked the car in the open carport at the front of the house. Inside the house, Clodine was still alive. At 4:04 p.m, a text message had been sent from her mobile phone. That message is the last moment we can be certain Clodine was still living her ordinary life. She was studying in her bedroom. Between 4:15 and 4:30, a client of Teddy's named Mariella Pavoni came to Collins Street to leave documents in the letterbox. She saw Sef's car. That green Fiesta was not hidden around the corner. It was sitting where a family car belonged. To anyone passing, it only said that Sef was home. And the first thing placing the killer at Collins Street didn't look threatening at all. It looked familiar. And at approximately 4:30 p.m, Sef walked into his sister's bedroom armed. He entered the bedroom where his sister was studying, and he attacked her. At some point, Sef compressed Clodine's neck, attempting to strangle her. He struck her in the head at least 6 times with the bat. At least 6 separate blows. And he stabbed her repeatedly. The wounds were all over her body. Then the room became quiet. Not peaceful, just finished. The study material in that bedroom still belonged to a future Clodine had expected to reach. The date was still 1 day after her 18th birthday. Downstairs, the kitchen still held the block from which its longest blades had been taken. Less than an hour away, Mary was completing the last part of her working day. Clodine's phone would never send another message. Her mother was already on the road that would bring her back to Collins Street. And Sef had roughly an hour before she arrived. Downstairs, the afternoon continued. Cars passed along Collins Street. People returned from work. The light outside began moving toward evening. Sef did not run. He did not call for help. He didn't abandon whatever plan had brought him into Clodine's room. He remained in the house. Upstairs was the bedroom where Clodine had been studying. Downstairs, the front door was waiting for the next person with a key. Now he waited. The house gave Sef time. Time between Clodine and Mary. He let the ordinary habits of his family bring them to him. He knew his mother's routine. He knew which door she would use and where she would put her bag and shoes. He knew Teddy would come home late. Sef didn't need to lure either of them into the house. Mary left the Blacktown office at around 10 minutes to 5. An employee named Patricia Tonal travelled with her for part of the journey. The two women separated a short time later. Mary continued towards North Ryde alone. It was an ordinary drive along an ordinary path that she knew. At approximately 5:30 p.m, Mary arrived. She entered the house wearing the shoes that she had worn to work. She carried her handbag inside. Mary had a routine when she came home. She removed her outside shoes and placed them in a shoe cupboard. She put her handbag in one of 2 places. But on the 10th of July, she completed neither task. She did not reach the shoe cupboard. She didn't put her bag in either of its usual places. She didn't make it upstairs to Clodine. Very shortly after she entered, Sef attacked her in the living room. The routine stopped in the doorway. Bag not put away, shoes not removed. No movement further into the evening. Mary suffered multiple wounds and cuts to her face, her neck, her chest, and her abdomen. Her windpipe was completely severed. This was close violence. There was no distance between Mary and the son that she had raised. Mary had barely made it through the door. She may never have known that Clodine was already gone. Whether she died believing Clodine was safe somewhere above her is a question the house never answered. Sef had now killed his sister and his mother. Teddy was still at the office. Once again, Sef had time. Time to look at what he had done. Time to leave. Time to stop before the third killing. Instead, he stayed. A few minutes after 6 o'clock, someone came to the front door. It was Mary's sister, Emily Luna. Emily saw the green Ford Fiesta parked in the carport. She believed someone was home. The kitchen light was on, and Emily noticed movement through a window. Near the foyer, Emily thought she saw a figure wearing a coat and a baseball cap, but her young son thought it might only be the coat stand. Emily rang the doorbell. No one answered. She rang again. Still nothing. Inside, the bell had sounded through rooms where Emily's sister and niece now lay dead, and Sef let it ring. A doorbell is such an ordinary sound. It asks for almost nothing, a few steps, a hand on a latch, a face at the door. But answering it would have broken the sealed world Sef had created inside that house. Emily would have seen something. Sef would have had to explain why Mary was not coming to the door. The house kept its secret. She could not have known how close she had come to the centre of the crime. She could not have known that the sister she had come to see would never answer another door. And she could not have known that Teddy was still on his way home. At 6:23 p.m, Teddy uses his mobile phone to call the landline at Collins Street. The telephone rang inside the house. No one answered. The house ignored a person standing at its door. Now it ignored a man calling his own home. Sef allowed that call to go unanswered. Then the ringing ended. Teddy continued towards the same front door where Sef was waiting. At approximately 6:50 p.m, Teddy arrived at Collins Street. By then, Sef had been inside the house for more than 2 hours. He had killed Clodine. He had killed Mary. He had ignored Emily at the door, and he had let the telephone ring while Teddy tried to call home. Now the final car pulled in. He entered carrying his briefcase. Teddy was still at the very edge of his working day, work shoes still on, only a few steps into the house. He remained close to the front door. He had barely returned to the home he had built when his son attacked him. Sef stabbed Teddy repeatedly. Damage reached the organs that kept him breathing, the heart that kept blood moving through his body, and the spinal cord carrying messages between his brain and everything below it. The force used was vastly greater than what was necessary to kill him. His briefcase fell near his body. He had survived the earthquake, he had rebuilt his career in another country. He had gone back into a collapsing hotel to save the sun now standing over him. And he died only steps from his own front door. 3 people are now dead. But this hadn't happened in one sudden explosion of violence. There had been more than 2 hours between Clodine's final message and Teddy coming through the door. More than 2 hours in which Sef could have left. He could have answered Emily. He could have picked up the telephone when Teddy called. He could have saved the next person. Instead, he waited there until there was no person left. And when the final killing was over, Sef's work inside the house was still not finished. Now he had to make the house tell a different story. But the objects around him were already telling the truth. The car visible from the street, Claudine's telephone and the text message sent. The kitchen knife block with its longest blades gone. Sef could not change those things, so he built a lie around them. And that required a second kind of violence. Not against their bodies this time, but against who they were. Teddy and Mary had migrated from the Philippines and built a life in Sydney. Now their son was going to use their Asian identity as a prop. He would take the fear of racist violence and write it across the wall of their home. He would ask relatives, neighbours, and an entire community to imagine strangers had entered that house. Anything to keep them from looking at the one family member left alive. He wanted the house to look as though strangers had come for the Gonzales family because they were Asian. On a wall in the family room, Sef spray painted a racist message in blue paint. The words were crude. Fuck off, Asians. And beneath, the letters KKK. The message was designed to drag suspicion away from the surviving son and toward an imagined group of racist intruders. The house was made to appear disturbed, but the violence had not come through a broken window or a forced door. It had come from someone who belonged there. Someone whose car sat openly in the carport. Someone whose aunt had rung the bell while he remained inside. He took a very real fear and used it as camouflage. And he wanted himself to look like the one member of the family who had somehow escaped. Sef disposed of the knives. He disposed of the bat. He disposed of what he had been wearing. None of those items have ever been found. And this is where we lose sight of him. We can't watch where he drove or see where he left the weapons. We only know that when Sef stepped back into public, the bat, the knives, his clothing and his shoes had disappeared with the truth he was going to hide. Sef needed to look like a young man keeping plans with a friend. So somewhere between his father walking through that door and Sef arriving at Sam's house, he stepped out of the reality of Collins Street and into the version of the night he wanted everyone else to believe. Clean clothes, no visible weapons, a racist message on a wall, 3 bodies left behind. He prepared to step back into the life he had arranged for that evening. The previous night, Sef had made plans with his friend Sam DeCillo. They were to meet at Sam's home at 8 o'clock and go into the city. Sam knew nothing about what had happened in Collins Street. To him, It was simply a night out with a friend. At approximately 8 p.m, Sef arrived. Less than 4 hours earlier, Clodine had still been alive. Now all 3 members of his immediate family lay dead inside the house. Sef drove into Sydney with Sam. He didn't tell Sam there was anything wrong at home. He didn't turn back. They went to Planet Hollywood on George Street. They ate. Then they visited a nearby video game arcade. Around them were lights, music, screens and strangers, the ordinary noise of a city night. While Collins Street sat silent, Sef ate in a crowded restaurant and played video games beside a friend who had no idea what he had just been drawn into. Sam wasn't there to be an alibi. He thought he was going out with a mate. At about 11:30 p.m, he drove Sam home, and then he returned back to North Ryde. For the first time that night, Sef was returning to a house he knew was no longer a home. The drive back created another version of the same journey his parents had made. Mary had driven to Collins Street believing she was going home. Teddy had driven there believing the same. Sef drove there knowing exactly what waited beyond that door. He knew the first body was upstairs. He knew the second body was in the room below. He knew his father had fallen near the entrance. He knew the blue words on the wall had come from his own hand. There could be no shock in crossing that threshold, only the decision about when to tell the world that he had supposedly discovered it. Sef returned to 6 Collins Street. He entered the home. The city night Sef had used as a curtain behind him was now over. At Collins Street, he was alone with the result of his plan. Then he picked up the telephone. At 11:48 p.m, Sef called 000. He struggled to get the words out. He said his parents were bleeding on the floor. He told the operator someone had shot his parents. They hadn't been shot. There was simply so much blood that this was the story that he chose in that moment. To the operator, this was happening right now. A caller had entered a home. His parents appeared to have been attacked. There might be a firearm. There might still be someone dangerous nearby. Every word he gave the operator changed what the police and paramedics believed that they were walking into. And the first picture he gave them was false. Not stabbed, shot. Not killed hours earlier by the caller, just discovered by him. An ambulance was sent towards Collins Street, carrying the information Sef had supplied. His parents had been shot. But Sef knew there had been no gun. He had removed the knives and the bat himself. That call wasn't the sound of a discovery. It was the sound of Sef beginning to perform one. The timing matters. The emergency began for everyone else at 11:48 p.m. For Sef, it had begun hours earlier, and he had controlled the clock ever since. And the performance didn't stop when he hung up. Sef ran to neighbouring homes shouting and looking for help. Neighbours found him crying and shaken. From the street, it looked convincing. A young man had apparently come home to find his family murdered. In those first frantic minutes, why would any neighbour imagine that Sef was the reason the house had gone quiet? so people responded to the person they thought was a victim. They saw the body shaking, the tears, the search for help. They couldn't yet see the hours he had spent inside the same house before going out for the night. One officer recalled Sef saying that he wished he was still studying medicine so he might have been able to help his family. But Sef knew medicine would not have saved them. He had made sure of that hours earlier. Police and paramedics approached Collins Street, believing there may have been a shooting and the gunman could still be inside. And that changes the way you walk up to a house. The front door is no longer simply an entrance. Every room may contain a threat. Every silence may mean someone is hiding. They arrived already moving inside his lie. But the moment they went inside, it started to fall apart. There was no gunman waiting inside. This wasn't one room where the family had been caught together. The violence was spread through the house, along the path of the evening. They found Teddy near the home. They found Mary in the living area. And upstairs they found Clodine. By then, the clock had crossed into July 11th. Clodine's one full day as an 18-year-old was over. So was the family that Teddy and Mary had pulled from the rubble and rebuilt on the other side of the world. Everything that had looked ordinary from the street suddenly meant something else. Outside, Sef became the grieving son, the person newspapers photographed, the person relatives held, the person who spoke about the three corners of his world being gone. He described Teddy as his hero and role model. He called Mary the heart of the family. And he described Clodine as its lie. Those words were not wrong. What was false was the person speaking them. And for the people around him, that lie deepened the loss. They were not only grieving three people, they were comforting the person responsible. They were listening to his memories. They were helping him stand inside a tragedy he had authored and then handed back to them as though it had happened to him too. 10 days after the murders, a funeral was held at the Holy Spirit Catholic Church in North Ryde. 3 coffins stood before the people who had come to mourn. Members of the Gonzales family were there. Friends were there. Members of Sydney's Filipino community filled the church. They had come to farewell Teddy, Mary and Clodine. Sef delivered eulogies. He spoke about the earthquake. He recalled his father returning to the ruined hotel to save him. Then Sef stepped forward to sing One Sweet Day. The song was about wishing for one more moment with the people you had lost. But Sef had been given moments. An hour after Clodine. Another interval after Mary. A ringing doorbell. A telephone call from Teddy. Each moment had offered a way back. He had rejected every single one. And while the people around him heard a grieving son singing goodbye, Sef knew the truth. He wasn't mourning a moment he had been powerless to prevent. He was standing inside the ending he had created. The singing ending. The service ending. And only then did the story begin moving beyond Collins Street, toward the money, the changing accounts, and eventually a courtroom. 3 days after the murders, Sef went to Teddy's accountant and started asking about the money. He wanted information about his father's superannuation fund and asked for a copy of the statement. The estate itself was worth approximately $1.5 million. With Teddy, Mary and Clodine dead, Sef expected to inherit alone. Within months, he paid a $5,000 deposit on a Lexus SC 430 convertible worth more than $172,000. He said the inheritance would pay for it. The money never arrived, and he eventually asked for the deposit back. And when questions were asked about the afternoon of the murders, Sef's story kept changing. One account placed him in his car, but his car had already given him away. It was distinctive enough to be noticed in the open carport. Mariella saw it during the period when Clodine was attacked. Emily Luna saw it shortly after 6. The car his parents had threatened to take away helped place him at the house. Another account involved a taxi and a brothel, a visit Sef claimed he had concealed because it was embarrassing. The taxi driver said Sef paid him to support a false statement. Sef even posed as a police officer when contacting the brothel, trying to make the story hold. Every version gave Sef somewhere else to stand. The embarrassed young man, the wealthy heir, the grieving son. Anything except the person who had waited inside Collins Street. And every new lie was built around the first one painted on the wall. But every new story eventually led back to the same place, inside Collins Street. Clodine was alive at 4:04 p.m. At approximately 4:30 p.m, she was attacked. Mary arrived at 5:30 p.m. and was killed before she could remove her shoes. Emily rang the unanswered doorbell shortly after 6. Teddy called at 6:23 p.m. He arrived at 6:50 p.m. and died beside his briefcase. At 8, Sef met Sam and went into the city. Before midnight, he returned and called for help. And the rooms completed the timeline. Clodine upstairs where she had been studying. Mary in the living area before she could put away her bag or remove her shoes. Teddy near the entrance beside the working day he had carried home. 3 ordinary places inside one family home. 3 lives fed into the same plan. 11 months later, on 13th of June 2002, Sef was arrested. In May 2004, a jury found him guilty of murdering Teddy, Mary and Clodine. He was also convicted over a product contamination threat connected to his earlier poison attempt. In September 2004, he received 3 concurrent sentences of life imprisonment. No parole date was set. His convictions have survived repeated challenges. In 2025, he was permitted to pursue a further appeal concerning his sentence after presenting psychological material about alleged childhood abuse and post-traumatic stress disorder. That did not overturn the murder convictions. As I'm recording this, Sef Gonzales remains convicted of all 3 murders. He continues to deny responsibility. But Sef should not have the final word. Not his lies, not his singing, and not the image of a grieving son he tried to create. The final word belongs to the family whose lives he took. Teddy was a father who once went back into a collapsing building for his child. He was a solicitor who rebuilt his career after migration and helped other families begin new lives in Australia. Mary is remembered by her sister as devoted and hardworking. She held her family together and refused to let the earthquake become the end of their story. And Clodine was 18, a student with an unfinished education, people who loved her, and a journey back to Melbourne she would never make. Together, the Gonzales family had travelled from Baguio to Sydney. They had survived the destruction of a hotel. They had rebuilt, and they believed the home on Collins Street was safe. I'm Linda, and this is Coffee and Crime AU. Not every case finds closure. Not every question gets answered. And sometimes the truth stays buried long after the headlines fade. This has been Coffee and Crime AU. For deeper into the case, visit Coffee and Crime AU online. Until next time.